My goal today is to share with you a vignette. I want to share with you, take you to the middle of a case study that I think is one of the most fascinating and important for us to understand as experts in leadership and organization development. Because you don't really understand your profession until you can fully appreciate the limit case. Until you can really extend yourself to understand what the potential reach is of the work you do, I think that we underperform our potential. So I want to take you to, I think, an expression of that potential. Any of you heard of the Other Side Academy? Raise your hand if you have. Some of you were here a couple of years ago when we talked a little bit. Some of you are new to this, but I want to introduce you to the Other Side Academy. So here you've got 70 students who started a place called the Other Side Academy about 2.5 years ago. Pretty new organization. It's a toddler at this point. These 70 students would otherwise be serving a total of 600 years in prison or jail. But instead, they bought a house not too far from here, about 3/4 of a mile away. In fact, I'd encourage you to mosey on over there on a morning walk or run sometime this week. Now, the problem that they had when they assembled in this house was they had to find a way to support themselves. And that's what we're going to discuss today, the way they found to support themselves. But first, I want to take you to a moment at the Other Side Academy so we can understand how you create a culture of accountability. So one day, Tiffany is walking downstairs in this old historic home at the Other Side Academy. She sees a door ajar. Now, you need to know a little bit about Tiffany. Tiffany, at about age 3 or 4, was raised by a mom who was a total train wreck, drug addict, abusive. Tiffany's early life was full of every kind of unspeakable abuse that you could imagine. And to fully appreciate what's about to happen in Tiffany's life, you need to try to imagine that just a bit. As she started to be introduced to drugs in her very early years. Her earliest memory at about age 4 or 5 is having to take care of her children because mom was out strung off and sleeping around and so forth. So here's old Tiffany growing up under underpasses, out in public places, living a horrific life, finally finding her way into prison and jail and drug addiction, becoming a violent, angry person. And now she shows up at the Other Side Academy, makes a commitment to stay for 2 years. She's downstairs, she sees a door ajar, and she notices that one of her colleagues, Austin, is in the room, alone. We'll come back to that moment. Second glimpse from the Other Side Academy. This is one of the ways that the students found to support themselves. They started a moving company. So Joe is out on a move one day with another student we'll call Jared. He's watching Jared because Jared is paying an inordinate amount of attention to the customer. The customer is an attractive younger lady. He's noticing that he's staring for long periods of time at her, and she's starting to become uncomfortable. This is another very important moment for us to pay attention to. Now, I want you to remember the backgrounds of these students as we look at these stories. So all 70 of these students come from off the streets, out of the jails, out of the prison. The average student has been arrested 26 times, has served 5 to up to 20 years in prison and jail. Most have lived homeless for long stretches of time. So this is the profile of these students that are in these circumstances that we'll now consider. So our goal today is to ask how, with a population that you serve, not students at the Other Side Academy, but how could you create a culture of supreme accountability? 3 insights I want to share. I'd encourage you to write these down, commit them to memory, ponder them. Some will be very familiar, but I'll express a couple of them in a new way to us. First of all, the big insight that came from our research starting 27 years ago was this. The health of your relationships, the health of your teams, the health even of your entire organizations is largely a function of one simple thing. And that is the average lag time between people seeing it and people saying it, between people feeling it and people expressing it, between people recognizing it and people discussing it. That lag time is where all the mischief happens. Does that make sense? So our goal as leadership and organization development professionals, or as leaders, line leaders in our organizations, if you want to develop a healthy culture in an organization, the one dimension that you ought to focus on is how do you shrink that as close to 0 as possible? Because that's where all the good happens. And as you're about to discover, it's not just organizational good. It is the deepest human good that you could ever hope to accomplish. Second big idea. The velocity of organizational change, how quickly you can introduce and diffuse new ideas in your organization. The velocity of organizational change is a function also of one simple thing, and it's how quickly people speak up and hold people accountable to the new norm, period. Similar to the previous insight. If you're trying to accelerate change, the question for you to ask, the variable for you to manage, is trying to create an environment where as quickly as possible people start speaking up and holding others accountable to that new norm, to that new standard. Third, and this one becomes very personal, all lasting happiness in life. I'm 57 years old now. I don't have many years left. So I want to share with you this pearl of wisdom before I go. All lasting happiness in life, from my personal experience, but also as a function of a lot of our research over the years, is determined by our capacity for three things: truth, love, and connection. Truth, love, and connection. And it turns out those three travel together. They are inseparable. You can't have one without the other two. You can't have two without the other one. Truth, love, and connection. The corollary point is, all suffering is a consequence of the lack of one of these. The mischief in our organizations, the weaknesses in our teams, the frustrations in our relationships are all about a deficiency of one of those three vital elements: truth, love, and connection. Now to the case study. So if we just spring off this, let's keep it professional for a little while. Let's just say we want to build a culture of accountability, a place where the lag time between when people see problems, see concerns, see opportunities, and when they get discussed in a quality way is as close to zero as possible. Let's say that's what you wanted. Well, what if you were having to do this with some really challenging employees? I want you to imagine that you're going to start a new enterprise tomorrow. You are not capital constrained. VitalSmarts will provide you all the capital you need to get this startup off the ground. But what you are constrained by is the employees you will hire. This is going to be your manager.
When I went to jail the first time where I was fighting a case when I was looking at going to prison, it was for a large amount of methamphetamine and firearms, and the end result was 2 years. I got out for 60 days after that term, got in trouble again for the same exact thing, and went back to prison for 5 more years. Got out another 2 months, went back to prison for 6 years, got out after that term and went back to prison for 10 years. And soon after that term, I had gotten in trouble again, only this time I was looking at 29 years, which in essence would have been the rest of my life.
So this is Dave DeRocher. He arrives at your organization and he will be your first employee. Excited? Does this sort of suggest any business lines you might want to go into? So this is your first employee. Here's your second. So your second employee is, let's see if we can get the slides. There we go. Well, let me back it up. Second employee is going to be Gwen here. The day before she arrives at your organization, she makes the headline of the local paper. She's a local celebrity. Provo police homeless woman stole items as collateral for drug deal. So she's your second employee. You're also going to be employing Jason, who served about 20 years in various prisons across the country. Matthew, who looks like he liked to eat your eyeballs for breakfast. You're going to be employing Diego, who's starting off a career as a wonderful gang leader. And finally, you've got Troy here, who looks like he could be the supervillain on a Superman episode, don't you think? So they're arriving at your place with absolutely no character. They're liars, they're thieves, they're manipulators, and your job is to try to create a culture of accountability and wonderful, thriving organizations. How are you going to do it? How, with that kind of energy, that kind of frenetic energy, are you ever going to succeed? So let me teach you how. All of you are familiar with crucial conversations as a toolkit, but there is a wrapper around it that you must learn to use. It's suggested in the influencer model, but I want to share with you the specific tactics, the hows, behind what happens at the Other Side Academy. But first, I want you to be properly impressed with it. So the way we begin is we're going to get 4 people from that same life, people who will be leaders with credibility. So you're going to have Dave, who you just met in the video, Alan and Lola and Steve, who've gone through exactly the kind of change that the students that you're about to employ have already gone through. On day 1, they're going to have to find a way to support themselves. So as I suggested earlier, their first business idea, and I want you to ponder this for a moment. I want you to really reflect on and absorb this. The audacity of them deciding that business number one will be a moving company? Can you imagine? Going to the market and saying, please let us come into your home and move your valuables. We have experience. But that's what they did. And the market was understandably nervous. You know, people were a little trepidation. I remember, in fact, I just did a radio show this morning with a local radio celebrity, Doug Wright. He was one of the first that we asked to help us get a little attention for the moving company. And so we heard that he and his family were moving because he talks fairly openly about some of these things on his radio show. And so a friend knew him and set me up for a phone call. And I said, hey, Doug, I said, how about if the Other Side Academy moves your stuff? Long pause. And finally he says, well, you know, I'd be less than honest if I didn't tell you that, you know, while I really want to support what you're doing and I believe in change and all of that, but this is my family. This is my stuff. And I didn't know how to answer this because we had no track record at this point. And it hit me. I said, Doug, let's face it. Every other moving company you're going to consider hiring is using felons. The difference is ours are trying to change. Long pause, and he goes, all right, let's do this. And it was successful, so successful that within a few months, they had developed a brand and a logo. Can you see the slogan on the logo there? I love this. The Other Side Movers, it says, we move lives. That's what they're taking to market. After a few more months, they were so successful, they bought a second truck. Listen to the sentence. They bought a second truck. This wasn't the government coming in or somebody giving handouts. This was the students generating income, competing in the marketplace, and kicking the butts of all the other moving companies. Within a few months after that, a third truck, and then a fourth and a fifth, and now a fleet of 7 trucks, over $2 million in revenue every year from a bunch of felons. And since most of the students were already pretty full up at the moving company, they had to come up with another enterprise. So they said, what do we do next? Well, it turns out there was an adjacency opportunity. Lots of people, when moving, fell in love with the story of the Other Side Academy and donated this couch or that dresser or this end table. And so they started accumulating goods. They said, well, what could we do? Well, what if we started a thrift boutique? They found this cast-off building about 4 miles south of here, and they completely rehabbed the place. None of this was done by outside contractors. I want you to look at this. Look at that. Look what the community got. This is such a wonderful external symbol for what's happening inside these students at the Other Side Academy. And the question you and I ought to ask is, how do they pull this off with that kind of a workforce? So far in the story, I hope what happens is, never again do you complain about your colleagues. Never again do we use an excuse that, oh, well, they're union, or that's management, or they're long-timers and too much tenure and resistant to change. Ladies and gentlemen, that's crap. The Other Side Academy is prima facie evidence that any human being is capable of enormous change. The question is, are we smart enough at our craft to be able to help this to happen? So, that's the story. So that's what's been accomplished. The question is how? How do you create a social system within 2.5 years that creates the #1 rated moving company? In fact, later on, I'd encourage you to go onto Yelp and type in the Other Side Movers and just look at the reviews and let it speak for itself. If you erased the name of the company that they were reviewing and just looked at the description of the review, you would think they had been to a spa. I mean, people are describing in euphoric terms what it was like to go through moving, of all things. The same sorts of descriptions at the boutique. So the starting point is this: as a student arrives, they aren't these idealistic, starry-eyed people saying, I want a new life. Most of them are just hoping not to go to a 10 or 20-year prison term. So it was math that got them there. And here's the culture when they first arrived. This is Mo Egan, who graduated from a program like the Other Side Academy called Delancey Street that some of you have heard about in Influencer. When you first arrive, this is your attitude.
You know, once you get to jail, you find out and you learn that the culture is that you don't tell on anybody. You don't rat on anybody. You don't snitch on anybody. It's a code that everybody knows and everybody follows, that you don't tell on another person.
So that's it. You're not just starting with people like you and I who are just a little reluctant for interpersonally awkward situations and speaking up and holding others accountable. For them, it's a code of truth. For them, it's a code that you never rat on anybody. You never call anybody out on their stuff. In fact, you cover for them. You got their back, right? That's how this works. And your job is to figure out how to get the lag time between seeing mischief and talking about mischief as close to zero as possible. The iconic image for me is this. That's what you want to have happening in your organization. I love that picture. This is what happens moment to moment at the Other Side Academy. One peer holding another peer accountable. Now you can see this is not the walk in the park. There's no make it safe going on in this moment. And we're stating our path right out there in a robust way. But as you'll hear later, there is enormous safety, which is why this works. You may not see it in this moment, but it's the foundation of everything. So here's the how. Take notes on this. These are the 5 things you got to figure out your version of if you're trying to create an organization where the lag time is 0 and accountability is the norm. First, you got to advertise it. And what I mean by advertise it is, it's got to be your upfront brand. The first contact people have with your organization, this isn't a surprise they get in the orientation later after they're hired. It needs to be part of the hiring experience. Right when you come in, you got to say, hey, one of the things we want you to know about us is we're about truth here. It's all out in the open. We hide nothing. In fact, we waste none of our psychic energy in this organization on the lying, hiding, and faking that characterizes most of the other places you'll work. And so put it out front. Here's how it works at the Other Side Academy. So this is Dave, who you met earlier, one of the founders of the Other Side Academy, and he's having a mock interview with a new student. I want you to pretend that you're the student. He's talking to you, and this is what it's going to sound like.
So let me ask you a question. Do you have children?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
How many?
3.
You have 3 kids. What are their ages?
6, 8, and 10.
So you've got 3 kids, 6, 8, and 10. Do you love them?
Yes.
I can't hear you. Tell me.
Yes.
Yes, what?
I love my kids.
You just told me you love your kids. You've been to jail 26 times. You're on your way to prison for your 4th time. Do you mind telling me how you treat them if you hated them?
Whew, tough question. Yeah, how would you answer that, right? So notice what's happening here. In this very first exchange, there's a social contract being created. Does that make sense? There's a social contract that says you are coming here so that you can learn what your moral defects are. And we're going to talk about them. We're going to be open about them. And you know what? Not only that, we're going to ask you to talk about everybody else's moral defects. This isn't just about you getting beaten up. Now, that's an interesting offer to make people, but it turns out it's remarkably enticing. Most of us crave that kind of truth and fear it at the same time. We'll come back to that. Second, you got to ritualize it. Not only should you create the social contract up front, that this isn't just a training class you're going to go through and it's some good stuff to use to make you a better manager and all that. No, this is who we are. That's the advertise it. Second, you ritualize it. You've got to find ways to build it into the work. One of the worst things about how we manage accountability in our organizations is it becomes this annual ritual of performance review, right? And so what we do is we pretend for the previous part of the year that we don't have real issues, and then we are supposed to dump them all at once. Well, that never happens. So at the Other Side Academy, there are 3 rituals. The first is the pull-up. You're told right when you arrive that your job is to pull anybody up in the moment, the instant you see them doing anything they shouldn't be doing. Period. That's it. That's your job. Pull-ups. And the way the pull-up is supposed to go is very straightforward. All you're supposed to do is stop the person and say, hey, we don't do that here. So if somebody is tossing trash from across the room in a way that's disorderly, that we don't do, you just pull them up. Hey, we don't do that here. If you're talking about your past, talking about jail days and glorifying some of the stuff you used to do, hey, we don't do that here. Your job after you've been pulled up is just to say, okay. Now you can say, okay, damn it. You can say okay with a sneer. You can do it however you want to start with, but okay, that's the only way you can respond. That's the ritual. And that creates an easy way for us, a scripted way for us to begin to have these really scary accountability conversations. Even with the ease of that script, it's hard. But we want to make it as simple and clear as possible. Second, pass information. Now that one might sound weird to you, but I want to tell you there are other organizations, for-profit organizations that I'll point to you to after this. VitalSmarts attempts to be one of them, where we do precisely these kinds of things. Pass information means make it visible. If somebody did something, if somebody was breaking a rule, make sure all the staff knows about it, all your peer leaders know about it. Pass the information. Be transparent. There's an organization called Bridgewater Capital that is the largest hedge fund in the world, the most profitable of all time. And they have an interesting practice similar to this kind of transparency. Everybody who gets negative feedback, and they have an automated electronic way of doing that, of you commenting on how I did this presentation, or how we performed in this meeting, or how we did on that last project, everybody can dump this feedback into this big electronic bucket. The cool thing is, everybody's feedback is available to everybody. Complete transparency. There's no hiding. The CEO of the company has a profile where everybody can see these are that person's weaknesses, these are that person's strengths. Here's the negative feedback they've gotten over the past 60 days, here's the positive feedback. It's available to everybody, no pretense. What starts to happen in an organization when truth becomes more important than face? What kind of potential is available to us? Finally, there's a ritual called playing the game. So this is where it gets a little bit more involved, a little bit more complex. So twice a week, including tomorrow night, students will sit in a circle. There will be 4 different groups tomorrow night at the Other Side Academy, and they'll do what they call the game. The way the game works is, if I see you do something you're not supposed to do, I pull you up, I pass the information, but then I drop a slip on you. I write on a slip of paper that, hey, I saw Justin do something he wasn't supposed to do, and I want to play the game with him. This is where we can have a more extended conversation with each other. So this is where we talk about what happens on the moving company. Joe watches Jared staring at the woman out on the move. And he drops a slip when he gets back home. First he pulls him up. He says, hey, we don't do that here. He says, okay. And later he passes it to everybody so everybody's aware of it. And now we sit in the game. And here's what it sounds like. Once again, this might sound like it violates Make It Safe, but just suspend disbelief for a moment. So Joe says to Jared, hey, I got a game for you. The other day we were on that move. You were staring at that woman, leering at her. It made me uncomfortable. Not only uncomfortable, but you risked our entire reputation. We spent 1.5 years building up a stellar reputation for professionalism and integrity, and you just about squandered it because of your selfish, lustful attitude. Jared gets defensive. He says, I didn't do that. I don't know where I was looking, and I can't explain where my eyes are and all that. And then a second student speaks up and says, I saw it too. And then a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. After the fifth, Jared finally goes, all right, I'll fix it. I'll do better next time, I promise. The next day, he's out on a move. Guess where his eyes are? They are on the box. They are on his shoes, right? They're on the ceiling. They're on anything but a person, right? Because he's petrified. Remember the principle. The velocity of organizational change is a function of the speed with which people are held accountable to the new norm. At the Other Side Academy, that speed is light. And that's why the next day he starts to change. And then he tries to sneak and slide back, and he gets held accountable. And then again, and pretty soon he starts to become a different person. So, fourth, demand it. These aren't suggestions at the Other Side Academy. And you, in fact, can do the same in your organization. You are the same. All the Other Side Academy is a place where we do communal work, like any workplace, a group of people trying to accomplish things, get things done. At the Other Side Academy, what we have learned is that the best way to improve as a human being, to reveal and work on your moral defects, is just to work with other people. And that's true in our workplaces as well. It is a sanctifying, ennobling, inspiring opportunity, but you and I tend to underutilize its potential. So this is Greg. He's a new student at the Other Side Academy, and he's starting to get gamed a bit. Listen to him.
One of the things I struggled with the most was pulling people up, and I actually got gamed for it a lot because we're a peer-driven culture, and we have 200% accountability, and we're asked to pull people up. It was one of the things I got gamed on because I struggled early on.
Okay, so what happens if you don't pull people up? What happens? Yeah, they drop slips on you. And so the fastest way to get gamed is to not play the game with others. The most important accountability at the Other Side Academy is holding other people accountable. They don't care if you make mistakes now and again. Yeah, you looked at that woman the other day, and we don't want you doing that, and we're going to fix that. But way more important than that is, are you holding others accountable? Are you watching them? And the reason we want you watching them is because you're the key to saving their lives. And so we need you to do that. This is one of the most beautiful pictures that you see at the Other Side Academy. If you walk in there, you'll see every single day people in the corner, in the dog room, on the porch, by a kitchen bay window, students with students, talking, processing, pulling people up, coaching, giving feedback. It is an enormous, enormous asset in this organization because it happens all the time. One of the things that I've learned in the past couple of years about crucial conversations is that I had it wrong. I thought that if you had more skill, that the frequency would increase. It turns out if you increase the frequency, you get more skill. One of the best ways to get better at crucial conversations is not just to go through a class. It's just to get out and do them and be imperfect at them. And at the Other Side Academy, it is incredibly imperfect. Nobody is a crucial conversations scholar. They just do it a lot, and so it becomes normal, and that lowers the emotional stakes. The reason in our organizations the crucial conversations create this petrified sense of anxiety is because they're unusual. They're novel events. Make them normal events. And that's how you create the culture. Finally, cue it. You can't walk into any room at the Other Side Academy without being invited to hold others accountable. Look at this, Games 101, just some tips for how you can play the game. Look how many of them are all about crucial conversations. Number one, if you're not pulling people up, you're letting them down. I love that moral frame for it. Your stay stops working when you remain dirty. Third, if your gut says you should say it, you should say it. Fourth, if you don't say it, you're contracted up. It means you're colluding with other people. When you worry about what you think, you're worried about yourself. Look at the moral frame, the reminders, the anchor that's being offered to students as they look at this. This is the goal, and in fact, the Other Side Academy adopted this from VitalSmarts. The whole objective of this culture at the Other Side Academy is to create 200% accountability. What does that mean? It means I am 100% accountable for me doing what I'm supposed to do to change my life, but I'm also 100% accountable for what? For all of you, for everybody else here. So, there's the how. Advertise it from the very get-go. Second, ritualize it. Build it into the work. It can't be just a training thing that we do. It has to be part of the flow of life. Third, demand it. Fourth, cue it. Fifth, normalize it. So that gets you about 30% of the way there. These practices, these strategies are wonderful things for you to know, but the other 70%, if it's not present, will completely suck the life out of your effort to create a culture of accountability. And this is the challenging part. It might sound idealistic to you. It might sound like a moonshot, but I want to suggest that it is in your hands to start doing it this way tomorrow. And this is the why. It's not just the how, it's why are you doing it? Why do you want a culture of accountability? What's the dominant motive? So at the Other Side Academy, when students arrive, they arrive suspicious. Every other place they've been, when they had an alternative to a jail or prison sentence in the past, they went to this or that program, but all of them had games that you could figure out how to play, workarounds, conspiracies. There were holes in the system. There was a weak staff member, a couple of other students that you could contract up with. And so this is the attitude when you come in. This is Jordan.
When I first arrived at TOSA, I was asked to be genuine, vulnerable, be accountable. And those were all new things to me. And I looked around me at my peers and the people that were practicing these things, and they just seemed so happy, so genuine and able to do it that I was afraid, and I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Do you hear what he says? In fact, that's what Jordan said like his second week at the Other Side Academy. I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. You all seem so happy. This has to be a sci-fi movie, right? It just can't possibly be true. And so he's wondering, is there some game that's being played? Is there a suspicious motive here? An interesting thing that happens when we have dignitaries visit at the Other Side Academy is they're struck with this transparent culture, with this place that is in the embodiment of truth, and simultaneously the embodiment of a second characteristic. They're attracted to it, and two things happen. So this is a group of dignitaries from Colorado that came out. They're looking to start a campus of the Other Side Academy. In fact, my colleague Beth Wolfson in the room here is helping make that happen. So one here is the mayor of Denver, the governor of Colorado came out as well, and they go through this tour, and they talk to the students, and afterwards they hear about these things like pull-ups and passing and games. And they say, you know what? I want to start doing that at our staff meeting. And then there's this second almost reflexive moment where they say, but crap, then they'd be calling me on my stuff too. You know, we both want it and we fear it. Everyone both craves and fears living in a place like that. A place of complete transparency, where you know where you stand. There's no pretense. There's no psychic burn of energy that you have to waste on suspicion and second guessing and politicking. But when you ask for a culture of truth, you stir the most profound psychic fear that all of us have. You and I all have this deep gnawing fear that if we were fully seen, we'd be fully exposed. This shows it nicely. So this is Tran, who was kind of a petty drug addict and a criminal on the streets of LA before arriving at the Other Side Academy. He's literally been there for 24 hours when you see that. You see the look on his face? Just deer in the woods, terrified, and what in the world is going on here? Cam also has the Guinness World Record for being the worst hugger in the entire world. And I've told him this, not talking out of school, but you look at this and you can feel what's going on in that picture, can't you? This is a guy who's just terrified of intimacy, right? Terrified of contact. And that's hard. And then you arrive at this place where you're told to get in everybody else's business and open yourself up so your moral defects can be examined. What an audacious thing to ask him to do. You and I tend to secretly believe if we were fully seen, we wouldn't be fully loved. That's not just Cam's challenge, that's mine, and that's yours, and that's everybody in all of our workplaces. And that's what we're up against when we try to promote a culture of crucial conversations. That's the deep fear that we're up against. But if you work at it, this happens. I love this picture. This is one of our very first students, Robert, with a guy who is 51 years old over here, Marlon, who's for a long time been a cranky, kind of obstinate, a curmudgeon type of guy, but is learning to relax and open up and connect. And look at the intimacy of that moment. I just think it's absolutely beautiful. But here's the principle. Here's the why. You can't get truth unless the motive is love. Period. You can't create a community that prizes and values truth above all else unless your sole dominant motive is, I love you. I want you to grow. I want the best for you. And I love our customers. And I love our owners. And I love our colleagues. That's it. I want to serve. I want to make a difference. Now, if that sounds too idealistic for you, you can go back and do it the way you've been doing it. But what I want to tell you is there are opportunities, and the opportunities work on all levels. The health of our relationships, the health of our teams, the health of our organizations is a function of that lag time. And you don't get that lag time down unless the motive is right. But the benefit here is this. You add truth and love and you get growth. That's how you create a culture where people are reaching towards self-actualization, where they are trying to push themselves to their limits on a regular basis. Louis Brandeis, a former Supreme Court justice, said this that all of us have heard quoted, sunlight's the best disinfectant. Oh, so true. Especially a disinfectant for our moral defects. Shame, which is the fundamental canker of all happiness, dissolves when exposed to life. Why? Because the truth about all of us is that we have worth. The fear we have is that we don't. If people saw us, they'd conclude that probably we're not worth loving or connecting with. But the truth is, the more truthful and exposed we are, the more validating that is to that most fundamental suspicion. When you live in a culture of absolute truth, zero lag time, complete accountability, you gain the possibility of healing in the deepest way possible. The theory here is this. Let's go to the other side, the negative side of the argument. The theory is that in most of our organizations, we burn up so much of our potential engagement energy with lying, hiding, and faking. Raise your hand if you think that's true in many of the places we've worked. And so the question is, what if you took all of that and put it into productive use? What if there was no need for lying, hiding, and faking anymore? What if we're able to create that kind of culture? Well, as you do, there are 4 kinds of moments, crucial moments, you have to watch for, engineer for, plan for, prep for. The first is the first time someone wants to lie, hide, or fake. The first conspiracy. And in most organizations, it happens within the first day. Cutting a little corner, asking for a little favor, skirting the way we're supposed to probably do things. At the Other Side Academy, it happens right down here. So as you come in, you get interviewed and you're accepted, you go down and you get dressed out. All your clothes are taken away. Think about the psychological significance of that moment. We do that in the military. It happens in organizations. We dress a different way when you come in. It signifies a new role or relationship. It happens in gangs. It happens in the ministry. New clothes or a new identity. And so what happens at the Other Side Academy is you shed all of that false image you have and you're given some pretty frumpy clothes. And so you're down here with somebody that you knew from jail. And she's giving you all of this crappy looking clothing that's going to be saggy and baggy and unattractive. Your makeup's being taken away and you're not going to be dressing up for anybody. You're just going to work on who you are inside. And now a conversation happens in that room. They've been with Dave DeRocher upstairs and they know that's what staff says. But now they say to Robin, hey, hook me up with some of those 7 jeans there and a couple of those tops, right? Hey, come on, we're buds. You know, we know each other. You take care of me, I'll take care of you a little bit later. That's the moment. And you have to plan for it. Because this new student will determine whether this is really a place of truth or not in that moment. And Robin says, that's not how it works here. I'm not who I used to be. Take the clothes, put them on, let's get started. And everything changes. Second, the second crucial moment is the first time someone makes a mistake. And their instinct is to hide, lie, fake. It's to start pretending I didn't do that, trying to look good, divert the blame to somebody else. And so Leif here comes to the Other Side Academy and he lies in his initial interview. So he's put on what's called contract. He has to wear a yellow shirt, do extra chores. It's tough duty. He's walking along, pushing his broom, feeling bored, and he decides, I'm going to steal a cookie. Now, it was the perfect crime because nobody counted the cookies. So he could have gotten away with having stolen the cookie. He could have taken it to his grave, right? So instead, because the emphasis at the Other Side Academy is transparency and openness, this guy, longtime prison alum, actually goes and passes on himself and says, I stole a cookie. And his contract is extended another week. And it made him the man he is today. Third, the first time you got to pull up a peer. So this Gareth, one of his peers approaches him one day and says, hey, I got a hold of some chewing tobacco. This is not okay at the Other Side Academy. And he says, if I had chewing tobacco, he said, would you tell on me? What a clever way of asking the question. It's a hypothetical, right? I'm not saying I have chewing tobacco. I'm saying hypothetically, if I have, this is very advanced morality, right? And so here's Gareth in this situation. The question is, have you built a culture where we know it's about truth? And in that moment, Gareth will hold boundaries. Finally, the first time I have to pull up a boss, the first time I'm pushing truth uphill. So this is Lola Zaghi, one of the founders of the Other Side Academy. She is one of the most powerful, strong women of integrity I have ever met. And yet, one day, she tiptoed into dishonesty. It was well-intended. She's sitting in the reception area, and a student named Tori is listening in on a conversation she's having with a healthcare provider. She's trying to help Dave, one of her colleagues, who's got a healthcare problem, and it's this Byzantine sort of appeal process. And so she decides that she's going to try to handle the call for him. Apparently, on the other side of the call, they say, well, are you a family member? Pause. Lola says, I'm his wife. It's a lie. It's a lie. The question is, what's Tori going to do? Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody compromises. The question is, in our culture, what happens when that occurs? Tori drops a slip, and now it's game night. And in games, Tori clears her throat, and she says, Lola, I have a game for you. All heads turn to watch Tori, and it's a culture-defining moment. Because what everyone in that room learned by watching that game happen was that what matters here is not position, it's truth. Truth matters most, and that changes everything. So what happens on the moving company? How do you get 70 convicts to create a best-in-class business in a short period of time? Move the lag time to 0. And when you do, this happens. So Tiffany walks by a room, and she sees the door ajar. And Austin's in there alone, and that's not okay. You're not alone at the Other Side Academy. And she has a creepy feeling in her gut. This woman who's lived under overpasses, who's been violent and angry and a criminal and a drug addict, has a feeling in her gut a stirring of morality. And so she pushes the door open. It turns out Austin has figured out how to use one of the car diagnostic tools to get access to the internet and is then using that car diagnostic to send emails to his girlfriend. It's clever at a level, you know? You gotta give him a little credit, don't you? And so she pushes the door open and she says, Austin, what are you doing? She pulls him up, she passes the information, and she saves his life. Because if he had gotten and stayed dirty, he would have split. And if he would have split, he would have gone out and killed himself and ruined his life. That's the Other Side Academy. Now, this may all feel well and good, but the idealist occasionally has to bow to the practical side of us and say, well, is it about people or profits? You know, we've got organizations to run. We got budgets to meet. We got goals to try to accomplish. It turns out it's not a trade-off. And that's the most important of the other message of the Other Side Academy. For those of you who want to study it further, buy that book. It's called An Everyone Culture. It lays out additional case studies of a variety of industries. Bridgewater, that I referred to earlier, who made more money for its investors than any other hedge fund in history, does it exactly this way. Next Jump, wonderful software development, HR services. Decurion, who does real estate, senior living, and movie theaters, you know, a pennies business, does it exactly the same way. It turns out the two go together. When you create this kind of connection that's based on our interest in each other's growth, is relentlessly involved in that kind of activity, it creates unmatched agility, speed, quality. You can compete in a way that nobody else is capable of doing, and what a nourishing environment. Because not only do you get to do that, you get to do this. Your employees don't look like Diego, maybe, I don't know, some of you they might, but they grow, they change. You and I are ennobled by this kind of a culture. You and I may not look like Cam Tran when we first come and work at a place, but we change, we grow. Cam is now in charge of all the freshmen in the house at the Other Side Academy. What a chaotic, difficult job. He has learned to hug like no other man on the earth. You take a guy that looks like this, a beatnik, heroin addict, violent guy, and he starts to become this. This man stood in front of a judge just 3 weeks ago and was forgiven of 55 years of prison time because of the man he's become. He's now committed to stay a third year at the Other Side Academy to change lives as a result. You get this guy. You get this guy. Gwen, would you come up here for a minute? Thank you. All lasting happiness in life is determined by our ability to absorb truth, to connect with love. And that's it. That's the work that we're about. The 2 million lives that you've had a chance to affect, our deepest hope is that that's what they've started to experience. And I hope as a consequence of you being here for these next couple of days, you're capable of taking that out to the world in a far more profound way. Thank you for being here.